Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to make a class. Before we jump into the code, let's talk about the why. Really, you want to build a class when you need to build custom objects that fit whatever your particular project needs. You really want to do this when you need to create multiple objects that share attributes but might have different details. So, what do we mean by that? Well, if you remember from a few bytes ago, we talked about datetime and the date object. Well, date is actually a Python class. Every single date shares certain attributes. Every single date has a year, a month, and a day, but the actual details of those attributes change depending on what day you're talking about. If I have something like July 9th, 2024, the year is 2024, but I can change that detail and say, okay, well, maybe I actually want to talk about 2023. Today, we're going to use the circle class as our example. And before we write code, we need to think about, well, what are all of the attributes that make a circle a circle? Well, every single circle is defined by its radius. So that's the attribute that we need to have with our custom object. Finally, we're jumping into the code. You write a class by using the class keyword, and then you give the name of the class. This can be whatever you want. Generally, we use what's called camel case, which just means that you capitalize the first letter of the word that you choose. Instead of having spaces, if you have multiple words, capitalize the first letter of the second word or the third word as well. You have to define the initializing method. You'll notice that this starts with a double underscore and ends with a double underscore. And so people usually refer to this as dunder init, where init is just short for initialize. So basically, we have to give our circle object an initial value. Now, this looks a little overwhelming the first time you see it, but just know all you're doing is you're writing a function, which is something that we've seen before. It's just instead of giving it whatever name you want, you have to use this word dunder init. Next, every init method has to start with this self. Self is going to refer to whatever circle you're creating later on in your code, and I think this will make more sense in a couple more slides. Then you pass in whichever attributes you want, first as a parameter to the function, and then you actually have to set them as an attribute. So we're saying self.radius equals radius, where the attribute radius is equal to the radius that we're passing in. So these two are the same, where here we're saying set this attribute for whatever future circle we have, set the radius attribute to that value. And again, I know that this can feel overwhelming the first time you hear it. Let's look at an example. So we've defined our class with these three lines. And then down here we have my circle, and we've assigned it a circle object, and we've passed in a radius of 3. So this 3 corresponds to this parameter. 3 is the value, or we also call that 3 the argument, because it's the actual value that we're passing in. So we pass in the argument of 3 for the parameter radius. And then inside of our class, we say, okay, this self is actually going to be my circle. My circle is the object that we're referring to with all of these selves. And I can go ahead and print this out. When I do my circle.radius, you'll see that we get a result of 3. So we have a class of circles. It builds a circle with whatever radius we give it, and we can actually do multiple circles. So here I have my circle, and I have my little circle, which just has a radius of 1. And you can see right there, we have 2 different circles, one with the radius of 3, and one where I printed out the radius of 1. That's cool and all, but generally speaking, you want to be able to do some more things. So if we look at a circle, we have the area and we have the circumference. Pi is just a number, so we have, 3.14159, and it goes on forever. We are only going to use the first few digits. Then we take the radius, and if we want the area, we square it. And if we want the circumference, we take pi, we double it, and we multiply it by the radius. This might look something like this. We use our class circle, we create a circle, And then we use the radius of that circle. Here's a stand-in for pi, and we square it. So in Python, if you need an exponent, you use double asterisks. So this is an exponent of 2, which just means that we're squaring the radius. And if I go ahead and run this, we get an area of 28.27431. But here's the problem. If I have multiple circle objects, I have to repeat this code over and over again. So here's my area for my circle, but then here's my area for my little circle. And look at how much of this is the same. We have the number for pi, we have the radius squared. What's the only thing that's changing? The only thing that's changing here is which circle we are referring to. On the top one, it's my circle. And down here on the bottom one, it's my little circle. One way to get around repeating all of this code is to make this into what's called a class method. This will work on every circle object that we create. So here you can see inside the class definition, all I've done is indented. I wrote a function that's called calc area. We pass in self. Self refers to the future circle objects that we're going to create later. And instead of putting in my circle or my little circle, we use that self parameter. And then down here, I no longer have to repeat that code over and over again. I just access the method by doing the label of my circle, the period or the dot, and then the name, which is calc area. And if we take a look at that, you can see right there, we have the area. We can do the same exact idea for the calculation of the circumference. We made this into a class method. Here we are doubling, here we are multiplying by pi, and here we take the self.radius because again, we're referring to whatever circle object we create later on. We'll come down here, and now we can see we can use both of these, calc area and calc circumference. And if I run that, I get both the area and the circumference. Now, why would we go through all this trouble? Well, look what happens when we have multiple circles. Now, I don't have to repeat the mathematics behind calculating the area and the circumference within the program. I made it a class method. And then for each circle that I want, I just tack on the method that I want to use in that circumstance. So here I have my circle that uses calc area and calc circumference. And then down here, I have my little circle, which uses both of the class methods. Thanks for watching and good luck on today's bite.